coming on tonight for what is our first talk on our Retrofit 23 series of events. Hope you've had the opportunity to look at the exhibition upstairs. If not, I strongly recommend that you come back at another date or later this evening to view the exhibition. This talk in particular is focused on social housing, but over the course of the next 4 months we've got a large programme looking at various aspects of the whole retrofitting challenge, and particularly how we retrofit at scale for homes. So some of the talks that we'll be looking at will be on finance models. It will be looking at how we need to upskill the labour force in order to achieve retrofitting. The use of natural materials. We'll be looking at fire safety and retrofitting, urban overheating problems, air tightness, the treatment of historic buildings and conservation areas. We'll also be hopefully presenting the findings of a beige report, or DESNES, that was undertaken.
So I can't hear you at all.
We'll try. Is that better? A bit better, good. So we've also got a report finding by the Institute of Sustainability, Leeds Beckett University, which was a £3 million beige funded programme which looked at the retrofitting of 41 different properties at different levels and different scales. It's just waiting sign off currently from DESNES, but we hope to be able to deliver that. We're also being talked about the need to engage with communities and in particular whole neighbourhood schemes, because we truly feel that that's the only way that retrofitting at scale will be achieved. We're also running a number of public events because public engagement we feel is very important. The need to educate and inform the general public on the need to retrofit and the benefits it brings in terms of their living standards, air quality and so on. So we've been running a series of what we call cafe retrofit events where the public are invited to come in and ask the experts questions on the subject of retrofitting. These talks will be running weekly. On a Tuesday lunchtime we'll be having webinars all the way through to the end of September, and we'll have Wednesday evening events that run through to the end of September as well. So everything is on the website. We're uploading the details now. The first 20 or so events have been uploaded, and we'll be adding them as we go on. So tonight, social housing. I'm pleased to welcome 3 speakers. The first talk tonight will be Matthew Allcock. He's a Chartered Building Surveyor and PAS 2035 Retrofit Coordinator from Baily Garner. Matthew will be providing us with a high-level overview of retrofitting, looking at hard-to-treat properties and different archetypes. Following Matthew will be Kevin O'Neill, who's the Commercial Manager at Rehab. And he'll be sharing with us details on the retrofit of Kelson House, a 25-storey tower block on the Isle of Dogs that was carried out for One Housing. And then Julia Ruff, Head of Staff at Plantific. Julia will be sharing with us some of the challenges housing associations face and the role that technology plays in helping to overcome them. Following the presentations, there'll be a Q&A. So please get your questions ready, and networking will continue over drinks afterwards. And I'd just like to thank Rehal for sponsoring this event tonight and providing the drinks. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you for putting on this excellent event and exhibition upstairs. As John says, I recommend looking at that when you get the opportunity. So, I'll be really, how deep is your retrofit? And I want to look at hard to treat homes, which is our focus focus at Baily Garner, working for social housing providers, but also to touch on various levels of retrofit and where the going forward. So John's already said, I work for Baily Garner, which is a multidisciplinary building consultancy based in South East London and Birmingham. We have architects, building surveyors, project managers, quantity surveyors, mechanical and electrical engineers, and sustainability consultants, so providing the whole package of building and retrofit. A PAS 2035 retrofit coordinator. The PAS 2035, which I'll speak about a bit more later on, is very much leading the retrofit of social housing, as I'm sure many of you are involved in. And some of the schemes I've worked on are Energy Sprong schemes, which is a Dutch-based methodology, and the SHDF schemes, which are central government-funded retrofit projects. So in this presentation, I'll look at the retrofit challenge, which I'm sure we're all aware of, and it is a challenge, and that's the point I would really like to focus on in my presentation. I'll look at what hard to treat is in terms of our housing stock in the UK, and then I'll briefly look at available funding, current government policy, data management, which very much links to Julia's presentation later, archetyping, as John says, and the emphasis of PAS 2035, which is on a kind of fabric-first and risk-based approach to retrofitting properties, looking at medium-term plans and longer-term vision, and then end with a conclusion. So the retrofit challenge, some estimates have put it that we need to be retrofitting 1.5 homes per minute for the next 30 years, so I shouldn't really be here. But that's a massive challenge, and clearly when we do upscale and start rolling out retrofit at scale with the industry capacity, that becomes much more achievable. So carbon dioxide emissions under the government's net zero strategy by 2050 must reach net zero, and that doesn't just involve social rent, which is largely what we work in. That includes all properties, owner-occupied as well. So, how deep is your retrofit? And this isn't a cue for a drinks or nibbles break. Hartley's or Bon Maman? What I mean by that is, what we've seen in the government-funded schemes is, firstly, a focus on deeper whole house retrofit, tackling the whole property, often at high expense and often technical and practical challenge, and more recently, direction towards lighter touch, shallower retrofit, where you're able to retrofit more properties. So in the first wave of SHDF funding, there was a target to reach 50 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year in terms of the space heating demand, and that's changed going into the waves, wave 1 and wave 2, to 90 kilowatts. So there's this idea of spreading the jam thinner, potentially looking at medium and longer term plans in order to get better outcomes. So I've referenced this very useful document from the local government association, which is worth digging out, called Hard to Decarbonise Social Homes, and I've unapologetically pinched a few quotes from there, which I'd like to share with you, which give a good overview of what hard to treat is and what we are dealing with in this country with our very old housing stock and our housing stock, which is very different. There's a lot of particularities within that stock. So a home can have a range of factors that might prevent it from being decarbonised to the levels required to reach net zero. Technical characteristics, space constraints, and external factors such as planning regulations. And the report says homes become hard to decarbonise when the measures required to reach net zero are uneconomic, logistically or technically troublesome, or impose unacceptable impacts on the tenants or others. And the tenants or residents is very much a theme of this presentation. Clearly, we're going to be retrofitting largely occupied homes. The role of the residents working with residents collaboratively is essential. This graph from that same report is merely to indicate that in the sector we're working in, social housing, there's a large quantity of system build properties.
So we're dealing with a lot of properties that were built post-war, put up very speedily, with a variety of trades working, often to tight time deadlines and a minimal wage packet, and all the problems that can then entail. And these properties were really only built for sort of 20 years, to sort of stand for 20 years. They're still standing now, and we're looking at retrofitting them. How do we manage that? And from a high-level perspective, even properties you may consider fairly typical in this country, you know, your solid wall Victorian property, they show various levels of hard-to-treatness, if you will. So a large, detached, cavity-walled house at the top there may represent fairly few challenges in terms of retrofitting. But when you get to a solid wall terraced house, a Victorian or Edwardian type, immediately you start facing challenges such as planning permission in terms of applying external wall insulation, restricted garden space for installing air source heat pumps, and potential noise issues and neighbour issues, and limited roof space for installation of PVs. Not only that, also have the technical challenges of insulating a solid wall property. And a mid-floor flat presents some of the similar challenges in terms of planning and installation of new heating, decarbonised heat. Just to run through some of the other technical characteristics that we found have presented challenges in the retrofit journey. Certain cavity walls are deemed hard to treat. These are cavity walls which are less than 50 millimetres in the cavity, and technically speaking, you're not advised to insulate those because of moisture control and bridging issues. So a cavity wall house may not necessarily be able to be treated with cavity wall insulation. And also bungalows, as can be seen in the image, we found that bungalows really present a challenge in terms of reaching reduced space heating demand because of the form factor. So you have less surface area for the volume, and this means that to reach something like even a 90 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year, space heating demand can be really challenging. A couple more quotes, which I promised are the last wordy quotes in the presentation, from that same report, which is actually referencing the English Housing Survey, dated 2012, but I think still very much relevant. Cavity wall insulation, and this emphasises what I was just saying. Of the 5.3 million dwellings that could potentially benefit from the installation of cavity wall insulation, 77% were assessed to fall into the standard fillable category, whilst the remaining 23%, that's 1.2 million homes, were classified as hard to treat. So immediately with those properties, you need to be looking at other solutions. Cavity wall insulation is not going to work. And in terms of solid wall insulation, some 8 million homes, including those with hard to treat cavity walls, which are therefore categorised as solid wall properties under the government funding as well, could potentially benefit from the installation of some form of solid wall insulation. But 6.8 million, 85% of these are categorised as hard to treat. And there's some further figures there about additional architectural features and characteristics of solid wall buildings, just to show really that the challenge we're up against is not a simple case of running around and slapping insulation on. There are many other challenges. And in terms of external industry constraints, I've mentioned planning already. We're working with a number of local authorities in the London and Birmingham areas. Some planning authorities are much more receptive to retrofit. Others potentially have different views. So working with those third-party stakeholders is essential. Residents in situ is a massive thing. If residents are not going to let you into their homes, and let's face it, the retrofit will involve a certain level of disruption, even if the majority of works are undertaken externally, then we're not going to get the retrofit done. The issue of tenure is an elephant in the room, I think. Clearly, we work with social housing, but we still come across challenges from leaseholders in blocks, adjoining freeholders in the neighbouring property. Where do they stand in terms of what they may have to contribute financially, as well as the other technical and industry considerations around party wall and the like. Supply chain and skills and labour, much spoken about in terms of the actual capacity we have as an industry to roll out retrofit. And existing defects, project I was on site just earlier today, in fact, an issue that's only arisen since works have started in an estate down in Sutton in South London, 1930s era estate. A lot of pre-work surveys were undertaken. Only now have we discovered that there is some discarded asbestos, potentially some soffit, which was chucked down into the cavity during previous roof replacement in the cavity. So we're having to deal with that now, and if the landlord doesn't have really good records on file, then that obviously presents an immediate programme, time and cost challenge. The image is of some foundations we exposed to a system build property which needed reinforcing, and another property we were retrofitting had to be put on hold because of some serious damp issues in the walls, which was related to below ground drainage. So all of these types of things will no doubt crop up in owner-occupied retrofit as well. And then briefly, grid capacity in terms of installing more air source heat pumps and PV panels. How is the national grid set up to deal with that? The flow of power and occupant behaviour. I think there's a big piece on the demand side as well. Clearly we can address supply side issues, but a big part is going to be from how we use our buildings, and maybe we need to use older buildings in a certain, more sensitive, considerate way. Very quickly on policy, I've mentioned the SHDF stuff. There's various other schemes, like the boiler upgrade scheme for heat pumps, and home upgrade grant, which is for off-gas properties with low EPCs. So a lot of these schemes are targeted at low-income, vulnerable households. The Eco4 is the development of Eco4, the Eco3, the energy company obligation, where energy companies contribute to retrofit works, and a welcome development in the form of Eco Plus more recently, which is widening that pool of potential beneficiaries to people who aren't necessarily on low income. So looking ahead, I think the funding and regulation is heading in the right direction. We've recently seen some updates to the building regulations, which are welcomed. Technological innovation is no doubt going to continue apace. I very much think that going forward, there'll be more of an emphasis on green mortgages and green EPCs, and that really forming the bedrock of value in a building. So the energy efficiency of your building will mean value, which hasn't been the case in the past. And is there a role potentially for stamp duty relaxation and retrofit credits? So in terms of data, linking to what Julia will talk about later, from our perspective, it's really critical that landlords undertake an initial study of their existing data, and a desktop approach is recommended. Looking at those wider strategies as well in terms of your planned maintenance, your fire safety upgrades and building safety upgrades with the new Golden Thread and Building Safety Act, trying to bring that together into a coherent whole. And looking early on at the feasibility of retrofit. Certain properties, particularly certain system build types, can be uneconomical to retrofit. And whilst we always recommend retrofitting and refurbishing first as the best option in terms of a carbon output, in certain cases, economically or even technically, it may be better to redevelop. Looking at voids and movement of residents in terms of the opportunity for developing a property once there's no one in situ, and making sure your archetypes, in the sense of categorizing your properties as best as you can to achieve efficiencies, is undertaken as part of that desktop study. And we're seeing now, obviously, a lot of data coming out of properties in terms of pre-works and post-works to inform us in terms of the best measures to take. So the technology is developing in terms of getting better outputs for residents, thermal comfort, relative humidity, temperature, and the like. Just a bit more about archetyping. We're trying to work internally on a kind of nomenclature of identifying particular housing types. There's a lot of them, but looking at that sweet spot between identifying groups of building early on, diving more into the detail as the design progresses, and trying to find efficiencies that way. there are a lot of homes, as I say, that it may be hard to justify the economical impact of the retrofit, but reducing heat demand will always reduce bills, emissions, and required space for equipment, which is another challenge, putting in the internal piece of kit for the ventilation or the heat pump, where residents are potentially going to lose space. And is there potentially a discussion to be had about rent, the level of rent for properties which are going to be potentially stranded assets, in that they may not be able to be decarbonised? Do we have that discussion in terms of what we do with those, rather than them just being passed on and being left? So PAS 2035 is sort of the underpinning of this presentation, really, and what's sort of driving our work. We have to comply with that standard. It's a whole house deep retrofit standard, off the back of the Each Home Counts review, very much looking at the importance of ventilation when you're applying insulation, given the failures of previous schemes where a lot of damp and mould issues were experienced. And that idea of the medium-term plan, so looking at measures you may be able to do in the sort of 5-10 year term, not immediately, to balance the cost spread, and also to work with the other constraints. And is there a certain amount of insulation that is enough? If a 90mm insulation gets you to a 70 kilowatt metre squared per year space heating demand, do you add on an additional 20 mil just to save another 5 kilowatts? Where is that sort of sweet spot in terms of the best thing for that individual property? So a couple of case studies just to finish. So we're working with a client, Central London Local Authority, London Borough of Camden, who are very forward-thinking in their retrofit journey. They were one of the first councils to declare a climate emergency. We're working on a couple of schemes, one of which is Brooks Court, which is an estate just off of Hatton Garden, surrounded by conservation area, locally listed buildings, and obviously space constraints. A lot of people to the right-hand side of this image will walk along this alleyway, going to and from Leather Lane to the delicious food that you can find at lunchtime there. So this particular estate, we assessed a variety of options in terms of an EWI, external wall insulation, and IWI, internal wall insulation proposal, looking at some of the challenges, such as represented by this block of flats, where you have very narrow flank elevations. You can't really actually access them to install insulation. The cavity on this is a 40 mil cavity, can't really insulate that. Top story were all leaseholders. We were looking at options of installing internal wall insulation. They were no thanks, not to my lovely new kitchen and bathroom. So immediately this block presented real challenges. It's a 1970s era cavity masonry construction with block of flats and townhouses, that can be seen in the image here, and some bungalows as well. Additional architectural features such as slate-hung mansard roofs, which we had to consider in terms of the technical detailing. So the block of flats, we looked at proposing a reduced scope of measures, windows and doors, ventilation, and loft insulation top-up. On the other blocks, we were able to treat cavities and propose an EWI-led solution with some IWI to elevations that were not accessible. So the image on the right-hand side there demonstrates some of the condensation and damp and mould assessment we undertook on key junctions between the EWI and IWI. And this project was the client's, one of the first projects for them to demonstrate a sort of whole house approach and to help tenants reduce energy bills, carbon emissions, and improve thermal comfort. The second project, a very similar area, also in Camden, but in a conservation area, is Belsize Grove. This image is of the rear elevation, so some very nice London stock brick, bow windows, dormer window, bow windows and dormer windows. It's a very large apertures for the glazing there. So this property, we undertook initial appraisal and engaged a conservation area specialist to advise on potential measures. This being a solid brick building, mid-19th century villa. It's got 2 wings around a central stair core and was latterly developed into bedsits. The conservation area report for this building actually really condemned the front elevation, which I think is tidied up a little bit in our model there on the right-hand side. But it had previously been rendered and not done in a very sympathetic way. So we were able to take that and show to the planning authorities that we can actually improve the appearance of this property, as well as improving the energy efficiency via the installation of PV panels, new windows and doors, and a breathable solid wall insulation as well. So just to wrap up, a decarbonised home, I think, is electrically heated. We're heading towards to heat pumps. That's the way, and obviously gas boilers being phased out in new builds in the not too distant future. Defining enough insulation is not absolute, requires a value judgment. So I think where professionals like ourselves come in, chartered building surveyors, architects, can advise on that sweet spot, what is the right level of retrofit. Some homes may fail to reach a given fabric efficiency target, and require a wider industry and policy discussion. So what I mean by that is the sort of the planning discussion, and also what we do with some of these properties which may be stranded assets, such as system build properties. Various constraints can make homes hard to decarbonise, such as was evidenced in the first case study, and changes are required to make hard to treat homes easier to decarbonise. So, as I said earlier, not just the planning side, but potential government policy, mortgages, and maybe a discussion about rental levels as well. So I hope that was interesting, and I'll pass on now to the next presenter.
Hello, good evening, and what a week. So what I'd like to talk to you about today, give you a little bit of introduction about the company, what we do, what our product range is. We work with Baily Garner quite a bit. We've got quite a wide range of products, but I've also got a case study I find particularly interesting. I've spent about 30 years in fenestration, glazing, curtain warning, windows and doors, and most of that in the social housing sector. So I'm a bit passionate at trying to improve properties for the people that have to use them. So Ray Howe, we were founded in 1948, as there. In 1958, it was one of the first companies to produce PVC window systems. We opened our first office in Slough in Buckinghamshire, and 1 in 7 windows sold today is a PVC window by Ray Howe. As you can see there also, the group's got a much wider range of product that we say, as opposed to just windows. We've got windows, building solutions, automotive, industrial solutions, and interior. So, for example, Ray Howe has factories alongside BMW, Audi, and Mercedes, and we produce the bumpers, the mouldings, the air conditioning ducts, etc. for them. And if you've flown on an Airbus 320, you've probably eaten off one of our tables. So it's quite a wide range of product. As it says there, we're polymer solutions that are long-term solutions. Founded in 1948, about 20,000 employees across the group, and we're represented in about 50 countries globally. In actual fact, my brother used to work for our office doing exactly what I do here for the South African office in Joburg. So, there's the 5 divisions we talked about: automotive, building solutions, window solutions, furniture, and industrial solutions. So I'm responsible for my from the Midlands down to the South Coast. Some of the retrofit challenges, you can see here that housing stock in the UK is some of the oldest in Europe, and as it says there, 20% of this was built before 1919. But the pace of how we carry out retrofit and the pace of how we improve this housing stock has to be increased tremendously for us to make an impact. I believe there's over 1,600 housing associations UK-wide, and over 300 councils just in England alone. So really these are the areas I believe will make the biggest impact if funding is available. And as it says here, the NHS spend about £500 million a year trying to treat people that are affected by worse conditions. And we've seen some publicity lately on how things can get to a pretty poor state for some of the housing, social housing that we've seen. And with the poor insulation and poor ventilation, etc., people are struggling to keep their properties in good condition, but also struggling to keep comfortable. So if we look at Kelson House, this is not a glamorous high-end passive house solution. It's not a high-end residential housing estate. It's basically a large block of flats that was originally produced in 1967, sits on the Isle of Dogs. This was a particular challenge for a number of reasons, but we want the comfort, the ventilation, basically the cost that people were paying out on living in those conditions, and we had an opportunity to do that. But there was a number of challenges for us. As you can see there, it's quite a large block, 25 stories. There was over 1,000 windows that needed replacing. The existing windows were first generation PVC, and I think they gave a U value of just over 2.4 U value, so pretty poor in today's standard, which I know on the passive house certified projects we're working on as low as 0.8. So 2.4 wasn't particularly good, but we could improve that tremendously. We also had 50 AOVs, automatic opening vents for smoke and heat extraction, and the standards that you have to achieve now for an AOV are considerably higher than what they were years ago. So this gives us an opportunity to make the building and the block safer for those reasons. We also put in fire-rated panels to bring it up to current regulations, and there were some curtain wallings to the common areas. So what were the challenges? As it says there, the height of the building was 72 metres. I know from experience working with the installer company that carried out the work that they probably got 4 or 5 teams that went up on the access equipment to about the 5th floor and said, it's not for me. So having to go up another 20 floors was a bit of a challenge. So also we had the weather. Of course, the block was exposed to up to 100 miles an hour wind. We had to consider that for the operatives. And if you look at it, it's not a block that's got a shroud of scaffolding and tarpaulin around it to keep the occupants or the workers dry and clean. It was basically exposed to the elements. We're fortunate the weather was quite good at the time. So the access equipment, the reason we chose this type of access equipment, the mast climbers, if you're not familiar with them, it does give us a facility that we can take the operatives up to the various levels and down with the materials that's been taken out with reasonable ease without having to cloak the whole of the block in scaffolding. And frankly, for residents to be able to sit behind tarpaulin for 6 months in the summer when they're normally looking out over the River Thames wasn't particularly good. So using the mast climber, although it had some really good access solutions, there was problems for the workforce to make sure that they comply with the really strict RAMs we put in place, the risk assessments and method statements. They had to wear, basically there was a policy of having to wear a tool belt, which most tools were tied off. There was normally one person on the inside of the block, the apartment, working in conjunction with 2 people on the outside. And all of the glazing, fortunately, because it was internally glazed, could be removed, and they used pressure suckers to take the glass out internally but pass it back outside because we didn't want to fill up the block of residence lifts with glazing. So there's a lot of challenges there. But we were concerned that if we worked with the residents and we kept them informed, we told them what we were doing in terms of access and give them access to the daylight they were used to, it was going to make the situation much, much better. And then we had a hidden challenge, really. Freddie the Peregrine Falcon. We were told very late in the project that unfortunately we'd have to start on the 18th floor, not the 25th floor. And that's because there was peregrine falcons nesting on the roof, and we had to have the time for them to fledge the nest, which we did. So by the time we got down to about the 10th floor, we could get back up to the 25th floor, because it's not a good idea of having to work back up the block. It's much better to start, as you know, and come down. Okay, so what solutions did we provide? As I said, we put in 1,000 new Rayhound windows. These were tilt before turn windows, and we improved the thermal performance of the new windows up to 40%. And previously, the windows that were installed were top swing reversible windows. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with those, but they are quite a safe window in terms of when it's in the fully reversed position. You can clean the window quite comfortably and safely, but they are difficult to operate. So we put in tilt before turn windows. And that meant that basically by doing that, by changing the design of the window, we could allow residents to get very good purge ventilation with the window in the tilt-in position, still being locked off on the handle, so there was no way they could put it into a fully open position unless they wanted to do that. And in addition to that, we put in an independent restrictor. So that meant that the occupant had to undo the handle with a lock, undo the restrictor, and then put the window into the open position. So we're very conscious about safety for that. The purge ventilation was important because at that level, I'm sure you know, it was the amount of wind that you can get with it blown through. If you've got a top swing reversal window, it's opening outward and the winds continue blowing against it, trying to shut it. With a tilt-in, they were getting much better ventilation. It's also important on projects, I believe, that we get the handover right. And frankly, sometimes when we do an installation of a product, if we don't let the residents know that the windows have got this facility that can be put in the night vent position, they can get that ventilation for the full height of the window, they can lock the handles off, use the restrictor, use the night vent position, all those elements they're going to miss. And I went to many sites over the years and found people have had very, very poor handover, even so much so that the vents were still in the closed position from the day that the installers put them on the window, the trickle background vents. Okay, so we put in the 50 new AOVs to the block. And you might find that a bit strange. There were PVCU AOVs, but to actually comply with the current regulations, the window has to go into a furnace at 300 degrees centigrade. And we tested the window some years ago, and we've got a certified AOV. So it's important to understand what solutions they are, because the original windows were timber, the AOVs. Okay, so they were compliant to the standards, and we made sure that we had those working on either end of the corridor. The other thing that the business is passionate about, and I think we've got the opportunity to look at this when we can, is that we were taking out 1,000 windows. 5 or 6 years ago, 1,000 windows coming out of a building would actually go into landfill. We had to look at how we could actually make sure we didn't go down that road, and the business is passionate about recycling and sustainability. So about 4 years ago, we bought a company, invested 28 million in a recycling plant that allows us to take those windows from the sites that are installed across the UK and take that profile back to the recycling plant and recycle it. So we had, coming out of this project alone, as you can see there, we had 38 tonnes of PVC, we had 20 tonnes of steel, 12,000 linear metres of rubber, 4 tonnes of metal window hardware, hinges and locks, and 28 tonnes of glass. So how would we manage that? Where would that go? It's important not to just dispose of that in a non-responsible way. So if we look at a small video here that shows exactly what we do in our recycling plant so that we can utilise that material again. We recycle the material and then that comes out as a core section of the window that gives us something really about 70% recycled profile on a new system.
Welcome to PVCR. We're based here on Hardwick Road in Runcorn. I'm going to show you the whole process today, from the receiving of the feedstock all the way through to dispatch of a finished white regrind chip. Now it's important to mention at this stage that PVCR, all of our frames are offloaded internally, inside the building. That's very different to a lot of recycling operations. So this is our frames bay, and that's typically the sort of stock that we receive on a daily basis. So we receive anywhere between 3 to 12 trucks a day, depending on the size, and they can be anywhere between 1 tonne and 25 tonnes. So our vehicles will normally offload in this area, and that could be walk-in floors, it could be tip trucks, and it could be the smaller 1-ton carriage trucks. They'll offload in this area, and what we might do is push the shred nearer to our Xeno operation. This area is where we get a lot of our offloaded waste, and it's a chance for us to assess the quality of the incoming product as well. And this is typically what our incoming frames look like. We try to get as clean as possible, but of course they're coming from, it's post-industrial, they're coming from various locations, from building sites to reclamation council areas. So this is our shredding operation. We take the frames, which can be anywhere between 1 metre and 8 metres long. We'll put them through a process that reduces them to a 60mm shred. At the same time, we'll try and take out as much of the metal as possible. Now, frames in the UK are as much as 20% steel, so we try to take as much of that steel out as we can at this operation. So we operate over 2 buildings, and then so we'll send a shred from building 1 to building 2 via the overhead conveyor that you can see behind me. So as well as the window frames, or what we call post-consumer, we also process post-industrial waste as well. So these are offcuts from one of our warehouse customers, and of course this is something else that we'll process here at PVCR. Okay, so this is building 2, and here we'll take the 60mm shred and we'll separate it into 2 streams, and we'll remove as much metal again as we can before we then pass it into the wash plant. The wash plant removes all of the floating material, and the denser material, or PVC, will then process the next part of the operation, which is granulation. We will then reduce the 60mm chip into a 14mm chip, and then we dry the product. After drying, we will then do a final colour sort after removing any less dense material. The final check is a colour sort at the end of line, and then off to our customers. Warehouse specification for white material is very high, so we remove a lot of non-white material at this stage. The white material is bagged up into 1-ton bags, and then we will transfer it from these skids onto the vehicle that takes it to line-out. On average, we will do 1 shipment every day, around about 22 tons on each shipment.
That gives you the whole recycling process, and as he says there in the video, that material comes from various post-consumer sites. So there's windows coming out every day. We've got a network of about 1,000 installation companies, and we've got about 150 manufacturers of our products. So in this screen here, you can see that they've got what we call the post-industrial waste. And part of the manufacturing process of window systems leaves small offcuts of about 50mm to 75mm. That's all virgin material, but it's just material that's left at the end of the optimisation of all the profile in the factory. So that gets batched up and that gets put through the recycling process. And we end up with then the central core of the product being recycled. It could be post-consumer waste, as you saw earlier in the recycling process, or post-industrial. But what it does mean is that we can have profiles that will have up to 75% of recycled material there. If we look at the BRE's figures for aluminium and PVC windows, we should have a life cycle of about 35 years. And we can do that. Our chemical technologists told us we can use that recycled material for 35 years, 7 times. So it's a long span of life cycle for the product. It's not a short plastic product. It's a long-term investment. But it does mean that we can offer clients the opportunity to have recycled material. And we've had to put that through all the relevant British standards to make sure it complies with security, stability, weather performance, etc. And it's exceeded and passed that all of its kite mark licenses. So we recycle about 100 tonnes of material every week. And we believe that, say, somewhere in the region of about 200 tonnes of carbon by doing that and not manufacturing from a virgin material product. But we are looking to try and improve that to somewhere in the region of 400 tonnes per week on each of our sites. Okay, so recycling the post-consumer and post-industrial waste, it utilises, as we said, up to 75%. You can see here on the screen you've got the core section there with steel reinforcing. That will be a recycled material, and on the outside that will be the virgin material. I mentioned earlier about 12,000 linear metres of rubber gasket coming out of these systems, and what we do with that, we can recycle that, and in its raw form it can then be made up into, as an example, gymkhana, pony stable mats where they put on the wall to protect the young riders, etc., and that's utilised in that. The glass, the 28,000 tonnes that we have of that, basically that's used in highways now. You're probably familiar with that process. So there are facilities that we can take that raw material, not put it into landfill, but recycle that and use that. So in summary, recycled window material can be post-industrial, post-consumer waste. All the materials that we talked about earlier can be recycled, and we can use up to 75% of the profile. So if we're responsible about how we use PVCU, we can do it sustainably, and we will continue with that theme throughout the business. The other thing is that I'd just like to emphasise is that the large project we did at Kelso House, we took the frames from that project, and since we did that project, we've probably done another 30 like that. So it's a continual commitment. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Going halfway into my presentation, but that's okay. Okay, I think at this point, everyone in the room probably agrees that retrofitting properties, social housing, to achieve the carbon targets or otherwise, frankly, is an incredibly complex, costly, but also necessary process. I'm going to throw some figures up. Matthew touched on a few of them, but these figures aren't specific for social housing, but I think it's important to think about social housing retrofitting in that broader context. When it comes to retrofitting social housing properties, the challenge is no less complex. And I kind of want to take a slightly different approach and walk you through a scenario to give you a sense of the challenges that social housing providers might actually be going through on a daily basis, and how, relevantly, why I'm talking to you, technology can actually play a part in facilitating the delivery of retrofitting properties at scale. Okay, so if you will, I'd like you to imagine a scenario. Shut your eyes if you wish, but I want to walk you through a scenario with me. Let's say, for example, you're in charge of providing safe, warm and comfortable homes for, let's say, 30,000 people. Those properties need to comply with various standards. They need to be safe. They need to comply with the carbon emissions, obviously, targets, and importantly in today's context, they need to be cost efficient to run and maintain. Now, for argument's sake, there are 15,000 units that need taking care of. Each of those 15,000 units will at times require ad hoc repairs and maintenance work. At times they'll be void and they'll need to be refit in order to, make them ready for the next tenants. You'll need to conduct regular inspections, make sure the properties are, compliant with gas safety standards, for instance. Each of the properties will also have their own planned maintenance works on the books. Roof repair on one property, refitting windows on another that might have seen better days. But today, in addition to this, your task is to make sure that each of those 15,000 units also reaches EPCC by 2030. So how are you going to do this? Okay, let's start at the very beginning, and I should emphasise that what I'm about to say is by no means an exhaustive list. You need to know what your current properties look like. What is in them? What are the appliances? What is the layout, the configurations? How efficient are those properties today? So I guess that means you're going to need to collect data on each of those 15,000 units. You can use a data aggregator, you can conduct surveys, but remember that by the time you actually start retrofitting those properties, all of that data will at least be semi-out of date and inaccurate, because inevitably works will have been done on those properties by the time you get to retrofit them. But there's no way of dynamically updating that data, the existing data with the repairs works that you've been doing, for instance, so it's the best that you've got for now. Now, you'll also need to factor in the planned works. How can you mitigate the disruption to tenants and also stretch your budgets as far as possible. Easier said than done when the different works for planned maintenance, repairs work, and your retrofit plans sit in different systems, because that's just the technology that exists. Now next you need to understand, with the help of experts, how you make these properties more efficient. You guys. Now keep in mind some of your properties might be Victorian, some of them might be, say, built in the 1950s, some will be maisonettes, conversions, standalone blocks, multi-storey units, each with their own construction, configurations, and different needs on what needs to be done to become efficient. But wait, what is efficient? The moment it's EPCC, it will in the future be carbon neutral, but we know that thinking is evolving in that regard. So we need to make sure that we're factoring that in too. So don't forget, you're also going to need to think about approvals. I think, Matthew, you touched on this. You might have buildings across, or properties across multiple different boroughs, each requiring their own planning, approval processes, more time. Okay, so now you've got there, let's think about how you actually deliver those retrofit works. Well, you want to do it in the safest possible way. You've got SHDF funding, so you're going to adopt the PAS 2035 framework. It means that your retrofits are going to be delivered safely, but now you have to wrap your head around that process. Huge amount of paper, huge amount of time. Now, retrofit PAS 2035 requires lots of checks and balances. That's brilliant. But now you need a certified energy assessor. You need someone like Matthew to coordinate the works. You need a designer. And then you need someone to actually deliver the works. Your internal team doesn't yet have the certifications or the experience to do that, so you're going to outsource that. That's fine. So you're going to look to hire external resources, okay? But retrofitting 15,000 properties, it's going to be costly. It's going to cost you millions. So you're going to trigger your procurement requirements, your procurement thresholds. So now you need to go through a procurement process. That's a little more time. Trouble is, there aren't that many certified people out there to actually do these works. In fact, there's a severe shortage of them. So there's a lot of demand from commercial, residential, private residential, social residential providers who need to retrofit their works, which means demand is high, bargaining power is limited, costs are high. Now, obviously, you're lucky in this situation. You've got your team on side, and now you need to make sure that your residents are on board. Now, you want to get them excited. This is about helping them, providing them with warm, safe, comfortable homes. It's for their benefit, and they need to be excited about it. Now, some of your residents will be happy with the plans. Some of them won't. Some will be until day of construction, and then they won't. The term smart meter gets bandied around. That puts some people off. The term heat pump is used. People know how to use boilers. What's a heat pump? You also have to factor in your monthly reporting. There's going to be reporting to the government. There's reporting to your board, to management. They're going to want to know about delays, probe status reports, what's causing delays, cost overruns. That's just to name a few. It's fine. Your external team is going to be able to help you with obtaining this information. They share it with you regularly over email or sometimes through a shared drive. And that means every month you're going to dig through your emails, you're going to find those updates, you're going to populate an Excel spreadsheet, and you'll send out your reports. Sometimes you have to chase your external providers. Sorry, Matthew. And sometimes they're going to have to change their subcontractors because that's just how the industry works. But it would be a lot easier if the subcontractors and the contractors were using the same system. A lot easier again if you had access to that same system. A lot easier again if that same system was summarized in some kind of dashboard so that you could see what the situation was just at the click of a button. But you don't, because that doesn't exist. Finally, you get your properties retrofitted. You've installed all this new technology in the buildings, different tech in different buildings to see what works, what doesn't. This is just the beginning after all. You're going to keep iterating with every program you roll out to make it better, more functional, etc. I suppose that means you're going to need to somehow pull together all the data from the different technology providers and overlay that with the different archetypes manually. Guess? Your tenants also need access to information on how to get the most out of that new technology also, and that's something that Kevin pointed to a moment ago. Pretty sure you got some manuals by email at some point. The energy efficiency of each of the properties is also going to need to be reviewed, monitored. As you work towards carbon neutrality, you're going to have to revisit each property again at some point in the future. By that point, the data that you collected a few months ago, long out of date. You're going to have to get that design work redone. The process is going to start all over again. And this is a challenge that is being faced by every single social housing provider in the UK today. The challenge to retrofit social housing, and for the purpose of this presentation, social housing, is an enormous one. There are countless stakeholders, countless moving parts, and countless unknowns. The technology that we've come to rely on in every facet of our everyday life, whether it's ordering a pair of sneakers online or getting lunch delivered to your desk, is not where it needs to be in order to deliver retrofit at scale for social housing or otherwise. I'm not going to pretend for a second that technology is the answer to all of our problems here or the challenges faced by social housing providers. It isn't. We need better policy, better education, better funding, just to name a few. More skilled workers. Can't miss that. But if you think back to the scenario that I walked you through, what if your data on your properties could automatically be updated with every piece of planned maintenance work or responsive repairs work that you did on your buildings? What if you could procure contractors dynamically through a dynamic purchasing system? What if every time you needed to do your monthly reports, all you had to do was open one system, you could visualize all of your program data in one place, you could press a button and print it? Those milliseconds, hours, days, could each save you time that would enable you to deliver more retrofits, 5, 10, 1,000, that would help deliver retrofits at scale. Because like every other facet of our lives, technology makes things faster and frankly, less frustrating. So, 10 minutes into my presentation or thereabouts, why am I actually talking to you about this? Plantific is a platform that streamlines property operations. We offer connected end-to-end software that connects processes and people for an intuitive, fast, data-driven decision-making. Some of our clients are some of the biggest social housing providers in the country, and we're backed by some of the biggest names in real estate. Our existing software offers solutions for housing providers to manage their responsive repairs works, voids, building safety, inspections, and workforce management. And we connect people, processes, property operations, property owners, property operators with their tenants and suppliers through one system to create exceptional experiences. But it can't stop there. So now we're challenging ourselves to figure out what we can do and how we can use our technology to modify what we've currently got or build something completely new to expedite the delivery of retrofits at scale. By partnering with a bunch of social housing providers and experts in the industry, we've pulled together a centre of excellence, and we've just completed phase 1, mapping the challenges faced by social housing providers in delivering their retrofits, and part of that was what I presented a moment ago, or parts of it. Now, in collaboration with those associations and organisations, we're going to begin designing something together. Because if you can combine enhanced connected technology that's been collaboratively developed, together with enhanced thinking around education, policy, funding, from places like the National Retrofit Hub, for instance, retrofitting at scale is definitely achievable. To the timeline, questionable, but definitely achievable. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew, do you want to join us up front?
Should we take that down? Otherwise I'm going to...
This is an opportunity for you to ask any questions you may have on tonight's presentations. Thank you, Matthew, Juliet, Kevin, for your various presentations. Very interesting, very informative. So we're open up to questions to the audience. Yes.
What about ventilation? Are we okay with passive ventilation, no ventilation, mechanical ventilation?
Matthew, I'm going to pass that one over to you.
Okay, so I'll start by saying I'm not a mechanical engineer, but I think that generally there's an agreed threshold for from a technical standpoint, an agreed threshold where mechanical ventilation becomes a requirement. So my understanding is that's around sort of 5 air changes. So if you're retrofitting a property, we're going to go below that threshold, you need to consider mechanical ventilation. There's different forms of mechanical ventilation. So you've got your MVHR, which is the heat recovery, which involves a lot of duct work, a lot of intrusive works in the resident's property, and space being taken up. And then you have various forms of mechanical extract ventilation, so a centralised or decentralised system, which often take up less space, and some of those can work with very little maintenance and even be integrated with the supply trickle vents in windows. So there's a threshold to answer your question. Obviously, always advocate the benefits of sort of passive ventilation, but you have to weigh that against the requirements for air tightness, which feeds into the sort of energy demand you're targeting. So there's a balance there, and certainly, you know, making people who have had their homes retrofitted, working with them to understand any new sort of systems or the working arrangements of what has been installed is very important.
Yeah, so I was part of the Better Social Housing Review panel that concluded its work late last year. And one of the most important things that you kind of briefly, all of you have touched in some way or the other, is tenant engagement. And one of the things I have to say, reading when architects write about social housing, that they conflate social rent with affordable rent. So, but there are differences in the way tenants are engaged. You know, people with shared ownership are engaged. So there are sort of subtle differences that enable. You've mentioned the issue of retrofit with fire safety, cyclical repairs, and that kind of stuff. So how do you actually engage people in different, you know, people with different tenures?
Julia, do you want to pick that one up?
Well, I mean, we don't, Plantific doesn't engage directly with tenants, but I think from the conversations that we're having with social housing providers as part of our property lab, it's pretty clear that at the moment, properties with leaseholders are in the too hard basket at the moment. It's you know, starting with what can be done, what is, I guess, none of it's easy, but easier to be done, learn, and then move from there. But inevitably, I mean, from where I'm standing, I'm a technologist, I can't speak to the individual liaising with tenants, but inevitably the use of technology has to play a part there, because how else do you communicate en masse with tens of thousands of people?
I think you're right. The engagement with residents is one of the huge challenges of the retrofit equation. It's interesting you were saying with the project Kelson House, you didn't cover it in the whole building. You managed it in stages, because if you're going to experience 6 months of inconvenience, you can't look out your window, you're not getting natural light. A lot of people are going to be reticent about having it done. So that is one of the massive challenges. I don't know if there was any, what levels.
Well, I've actually attended many a residents' evening where we have a large sample of residents all invited over many nights, many times, so they can get to that particular meeting. And I found the payback's enormous. If you can actually explain to people why you've chosen, for example, or the architect or the client chosen that type and design of window, these are the features, the benefits that you will get from that. People appreciate that. They understand that it might be a security thing, it might be a ventilation, it might be access for cleaning, it could be a number of things, it could be the regulations don't allow you to do what you did many years ago. So if you can have that engagement with them at a very early stage, I find that they buy into that most of the time very well.
It's quite interesting actually. If you look at the exhibition upstairs and look at the public housing projects, especially projects such as Thurrock, which was a tower block again, which Kenza put heat pumps into. There was a huge engagement process that went on for about 8 months prior to any work being undertaken. And that's essential because you need obviously to get the residents buying, because they are going to be inconvenienced. There's no way around it. Yes, sorry.
Well, my name is Jakob. I'm a leaseholder in ex-council block. I'm actually on the block at the moment because that engagement at the beginning never happened. Retrofitting is something I learned only maybe in the last year and a half maybe, in the word retrofitting. I should have known because my home was, is under threat of demolition. And so the challenge is, I think everyone needs to be aware. As residents, we need to be aware of the different choices and options, and those options need to be considered in a very transparent way. Yeah, ballots need to be done, but before ballots, everyone needs to be empowered. And there is retrofitting and there is demolition, right? And when we consider about social housing, I think we need to actually put into the equation. Yeah, and another thing you discussed is it's mentioned energy efficiency. My home, where some people came today, to change the boiler after a long time, and they said, "Oh, it's hot." Yeah, it's energy efficient. Old homes are energy efficient. People who move to the new ones actually are paying more in bills. So which ones are energy efficient? In the old home, So I think lesson need to be learned. The old homes are well made, and so from those lessons need to be made. The double glazing, all the other things need to be, taken into consideration.
Well, I mean, one of the crazy things is the new houses that are being built now will need to be retrofitted to hit 2050 standards, which is absolutely ludicrous. I mean, it's, how can that be happening given we know the scale of the challenge already? So, that's something that also needs to be addressed as well.
Just on a couple of the points there. So, yeah, I think one thing we're looking at more and more now with these projects is, getting stakeholder groups involved early, and we've set up on one of our projects sort of resident engagement steering group, and we're looking at getting a resident group, pool of residents to feed into, the feasibility and the design, understand, where each stakeholder is coming from. We're working with clients in a variety of regions in the UK and different populations and demographics, and having those wider stakeholders feed in early on to sort of like a kind of project execution plan, if you will, is really valuable. It's worth spending the time up front to make sure everyone feels that involvement and they don't feel like they're having something imposed on them. And that involves a whole variety of stakeholders, because with the leasehold issue, obviously there's sort of like a lease side to that, there's a finance side. So it's trying to bring all those parties together. I think the guys mentioned, it's just a huge number of stakeholders. So I think the earlier you can get that sort of steering group there and start to map out that sort of stakeholder tree and how you're going to bring these parties together, so you're not sort of chasing your tail, I think that the better.
Yeah.
I think there's also a case to be argued for earlier than that intervention from government, right? Like people need education on these topics. We don't get it as a society. And it's, of course, what you're saying is essential when it comes to the individual building, but ideally, in a perfect world, we would know the word retrofit before you knock on the door. And we would understand the challenges that society is facing, and we would understand the benefits of introducing new types of technology. Heat pumps might not sound as scary if you've been educated about the benefits of them and how to operate them before it comes to retrofitting your particular building. I would imagine, make your life easier when it comes to that actual stakeholder tenant engagement.
Adrian White.
So two questions, they sort of interconnect. One is about heat pumps in high rises, like the 20-story block that you showed us on the dogs there. Is that possible to do today or not?
Yes, it's a straight answer, yes.
Okay, because I'm looking at bringing this to a particular council? And the second thing is, what about grid capacity? How is London, in terms of high-rise blocks in an area, turning over to some of this? What happens with the grid right now? Are we not there yet?
I don't know if you can comment on that, Matthew. I don't have an answer for that one.
All right.
Yeah, it's a very specialist area, but I think there's a consensus that the current grid is not very malleable. So if you're going to be, and it's especially difficult to get any information out of UKP and the likes of those. So we don't really know the ins and outs, but obviously there's a certain way they're balancing, the flows of power. And obviously if you're shifting that with the installation of PVs, which are exporting power to the grid, and heat pumps, which are pulling more, I mean, there is a discussion to be had there, but I wouldn't want to sort of say any more because it's not my specialty. But in terms of heat,
Becoming hiccup if there are several high-rises in the same location that you wanted to retrofit?
Yeah, I think definitely engage with the local statutory authority and ask that question because, yeah, it's a very specialist area. But, I mean, in terms of, I think one of the schemes that was mentioned for Thurrock, they're looking at a sort of ground source heat pump solution for a high-rise. So it doesn't need to be...
Yes.
Yeah,
correct.
It doesn't need to be an air source heat pump, and obviously with a high rise you have issues about where you're installing the condensers, and there'll be a sort of an assessment to determine which is the more sort of advantageous solution. But yeah, we've seen projects where they're using ground source heat pumps as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
I should declare I'm a colleague of Matthew's.
This is a loaded question.
Yeah, it's a loaded question. I just wanted to make some observations rather than ask a direct question, if I may. We're actually retrofit coordinator on that Thurrock scheme with Camden, which is ground source heat pump. And so the electrical load from those micro shoebox heat pumps is really quite low for a low carbon heat source. So I would definitely recommend to people that they do have a look at Camden. In terms of the point about warming people up and resident engagement, start as lessons from a wide range of projects that we're involved in. Matthew's sort of touched on is start early. Don't wait till the project's even defined. Start sort of warming people up in the area that you're thinking you might be implementing a strategy on as early as possible. And that would definitely be helped by a national retrofit strategy, which we don't have. We have lots of funding that we're drawing from here and there. So that would involve a comms campaign. Demystify. I think retrofit's a really loaded phrase. It looks backwards. People go, what on earth are you talking about? Retrofitting. It's a military phrase about retrofitting warships when the technology changed. So warm, sustainable homes, comfy homes. Language is really important to a lot of people. Rooms of professionals very easy to talk about retrofit. So in terms of resident engagement, champions and advocates, if you can get residents on board that got involved, had some work done on one part of your programme, really get them involved on another part of the programme. Contractors are those absolutely essential when you're delivering work, so resident liaison officers. So if you're thinking about it, a real strategy in relation to that, and then bespoke approaches, but handover videos, O&M manuals, so that people really actually understand how to use what you've put in. So yeah, definitely, I would say of all the things we've talked about here today, resident engagement is probably the most important. If you can't get in, you won't do the retrofit. Simple as that. If someone doesn't buy the idea that the owner is retrofitting and they're suspicious of what you're proposing to do, then you won't get in and you won't achieve any of your objectives. So, sorry, it's not a question.
No, it's very good. No, it's a great addition. Thank you, John. Yes.
Yeah, John Bevan, I'm a councillor in Harringay. Does any leaseholder or shared ownership, does anyone actually get a bill? Or because some of this is funded by the government, is it basically at no cost to those people? Because it wouldn't be a cost to social tenants, whatever was happening. And then some of the equipment in the flats, I might be slightly ignorant here, is it more complicated to operate than any of the existing boilers? Because there's a lot of people who actually don't actually know how to adjust their existing boilers. So that's a real issue for me if it's more complicated.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that is part of the engagement as well with the residents, that the workshops are there, so people will be taught how to use the ground source heat pump unit and so on. That's essential. If that engagement doesn't take place, then the user, so it's that education as you refer to, the actual education of the user in terms of the new products that are being put into place. Absolutely essential.
Yeah, I think, so just to take that second question first, so yeah, in terms of the new kit, I mean, you're typically going to be looking at, you know, a heat pump in place of a boiler, maybe some kind of mechanical ventilation, which may or may not replace some existing fans which are in the kitchens and bathrooms, and then PV panels. A lot of that will generally be able to just run on its own. So the PVs, they're wired up, they'll run, they'll be set up to take on power generated and any export arrangement. The heat pump will be set to run via the wet radiator system or underfloor system at a certain temperature, and there'll be a similar arrangement of being able to program various sort of temperatures. And then the ventilation system often will only require a sort of change of filter for an MVHR, even less for an MEV, mechanical extract ventilation. So I don't think there's really too much of a concern about knowing how to operate the new kit. I think it's more about behaviour change, because a gas boiler, been blessed by these machines which fire up instantaneously, give you hot water immediately, run at 65 degrees, circulating temperature. It's all very nice. A heat pump will run at much lower operating temperatures. And if people don't understand how that works, then they're going to potentially not use it correctly and not achieve the efficiencies. So the flow temperature will be slightly lower. It might take a little longer to warm up the water. That sort of thing. So I think it's that behaviour change and that sort of empowerment so people understand and appreciate how things operate differently. Just on the leasehold question, again, not my specialty, but my understanding is currently there's a bit of a grey area between retrofit works being termed as improvement works rather than sort of necessary works. And I think that requires a steer from government as to how, you know, retrofit can be sort of more doable when you've got a variety of tenures. Because I think at the moment what we're finding is clients are sort of presenting this retrofit to leaseholders and they don't kind of have to accept it. And if there's any kind of cost buy-in, they're kind of sort of saying, no, I'm all right, thanks. Whereas if the arrangement was slightly different, then, you know, there'd be a different conversation. There's still the question about how that would be financed, though. So where's that money coming from? Is a leaseholder going to be paying for that? Is the landlord? So there's a question there, but I think the central government steer and funding to support that transition is absolutely essential.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, it seems to me that there seems, sorry, I need to turn my hearing down so I can hear myself shouting. Right. It seems to me that in order to retrofit at scale, there needs to be a behavioural change of actually local councils. With their regeneration programmes, where they're still talking about demolishing properties, putting up new properties which aren't to Passive House standards, instead of retrofitting. So we're now in this ridiculous situation. I'm a council tenant, I live in Lambeth, they've got an estate demolition programme of up to 6 estates will be demolished. Some of those estates are already having tenants decanted from the properties, so they're actually being presented with a near empty block, which instead of demolishing, it would make more sense to retrofit, because of all the problems that you were talking about. You know, if there's no one living in the block and there's no leaseholders there, there's no problem, you can do a whole block retrofit. My friend over here is the only one living in a block of how many flats?
54 flats.
Wow.
So it's actually a unique opportunity for those houses to be retrofitted. Yeah, and also we understand that there aren't enough people trained up to actually do the work.
Yeah.
So what the campaign group that I'm involved with, Refurbished Don't Demolish, is calling for these near empty blocks to be retrofitted and be used as a vehicle to train up a retrofit task force directed by the council and funded by the council, hopefully. They could take on borrowing from the housing revenue account and maybe the general fund, maybe the Public Works Loan Board, in order to train up a workforce which they directly employ to learn how to retrofit those near empty blocks. There's one estate, I won't talk much longer, called South Lambeth Estate, where they actually built a decamp block first, so that they could get the people out of one block into the decamp block. So as I say, we're now presented with a near empty block which could be retrofitted. The few people remaining there could be put into other flats on the same estate. Retrofit, move, put the decamp block up first. It seems to me to be a solution to lots of problems. Plus it keeps the community together. It means that people's rents are kept the same instead of building new and the costs just escalate through the roof. Property values, there's fewer social housing being built on this estate than exists at the moment. It just presents itself with a, you know, we need to look at things differently now and stop the regeneration programs and look at things differently to do this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you've made a number of sort of very valid points there. The upskilling of the workforce is an essential part of the equation. Do you think this sounds like a sensible scheme? Because I'm trying to make the case to London Council that they should be changing tack. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Construction Leadership Council have estimated, I think, 500,000 jobs will be created if we're going to achieve retrofitting at scale through people like Matthew in terms of trained retrofit past 2035 plus coordinators. Through to the actual tradespeople as well, because that's one of the other issues. There's not enough trained contractors out there that can actually undertake retrofit projects properly to ensure there's no other issues that arise, because a lot of the houses are meant to breathe, they were built to breathe, so if you start insulating them to a too high a standard, you start getting other issues. So there's a real need for that level of engagement of workforce to be brought up to speed. And in fact, one of the talks that we'll be delivering later in the series will be hopefully answering and challenging that question.
Just one more thing about the engagement with people on the estates. And what we've seen repeatedly is that there is only engagement with people who are compliant to what the council want, and everyone else is deemed to be a troublemaker.
Yeah.
And that's a real problem.
And that way we go back to what Julia was saying, that the earlier engagement, the easier it is to get people to understand. Yeah.
That's the problem.
Sorry, Matthew.
Yeah, so, I just firstly say thank you for doing what you're doing, because I think the role that residents play in groups such as yours is really important, actually, because it does really have an impact on the direction of travel for local councils and the wider society. I think it may feel like you're sort of banging your head against a brick wall at times, but I think definitely sort of keep up with that. I think what you're suggesting is really sensible, notwithstanding some of the things I said earlier about, the challenges of some existing buildings, technical, structural, etc. considerations. But I think it makes absolute sense, and I think it does require, as I say again, that steer from government, that retrofit first. That's what we should be focusing on, and that needs to cascade down to local authorities, local planning authorities who have their local plans and new homes to build. And I think a lot of the time it's just a lot easier to knock something down, blank slate, stick up a load of new homes. There's your percentage of new homes done for the month, sort of thing. But what that doesn't take into account is the embodied carbon. And a good development we're seeing in the industry now is the development of Approved Document Z, which is an embodied carbon standard, which will start to really assess and take into account what that looks like in terms of new build initially, and then going forward, refurbishment as well. So I think that's a welcome development, and therefore I think that would help swing the balance towards, you know, retrofitting that void block of flats is actually, well, we kind of have to do it now because of the regulation, but also it makes not just economic sense, but also sense in terms of the environment. So, yeah, I think things are moving in the right direction, and keep doing what you're doing.
So a couple more questions, and then I think we can break for drinks and ask any more questions there. Yes.
Oh, right. Talking about retrofitting and scale, wearing my MMC hat, we're developing a retrofit overcladding system which is at scale, and we will be taking a lady's point on about training local people to retrofit their own building. I can't say too much about that. My experience is that I sat on the board of a housing association for 13 years, now retired from there, so I know all the problems around retrofitting. But the biggest elephant in the room that no one has talked about is ESG. ESG funding from financiers, getting up to your property, up to EPC, and our discussion with the insurers, which is going to hit the industry very hard, is that they want a shadow of the existing building to make sure that it can live another 50 years of the existing structure. Then you have to have the digital twin of the overcladding that you're putting onto the building, so that the facility manager can control the maintenance of the building in the future. So these are things that are going to come quite quickly that the industry is not even addressing, and they haven't woken up to it yet.
There are overcladding systems on the market. Energy Strong, I think you actually referenced them, didn't you, Matthew, in your presentation, are out there already. Are you familiar with?
Yes, I'm familiar with that. Our system is non-combustible. We don't use any combustible components. We get it up to passive house standards, because that is going to be the future. And then it's an overcladding system. Then when the tenants move out, then you can upgrade it, because as what's been said, you know, you will have problems getting into various properties. So, and it's very important to get your tenants on board very earlier on. But the biggest issue is digital twin, you know, and for future retrofit, and that has to be started to be addressed from now, because that's what the insurers will be coming and hitting all social landlords and private landlords going forward.
Yeah, I think that the MMC, so modern methods of construction, is absolutely a big part to play. And what we're seeing more and more projects now going for off-site solutions, so like craned-in wall panels, etc. They're not without their complications, but that's definitely moving apace, and you'll get generally shorter install times. I mean, the Energy Strong model is based around a 30-day installation period with minimal interventions internally, which is much more attractive to tenants. I think the challenge, again, as mentioned a few times in this country, is just the variety and age of our housing stock. As you rightly say, sir, about the sort of breathability of walls and how the off-site panels interact there. Actually, part of a working group with the RICS at the moment, looking at some of the issues such as what lenders and financiers are doing, and insurers as well, another party to this. As I said in my presentation, things are moving more towards green EPCs, green mortgages. Lenders and financiers, insurers are looking for a steer from government, but they are, going to be valuing and insuring properties that are more energy efficient, I feel, higher in future, and so that's going to reflect and have an impact in that market. So I think it's all kind of moving, but as you say, there's a lot of moving parts. Too many for any one person to get their head around, really.
Yeah, I guess it's a trust mark issue as well, is it, in terms of certification and approval?
Yeah, I mean, the Trustmark accreditation supports the PAS 2035 process. So new projects are lodged on the Trustmark data warehouse. So that's kind of like a quality assurance arrangement, which is we're seeing in social housing at the moment. Obviously, there are sort of various warranty and Trustmark schemes supporting retrofit measures across the wider stock. But yeah, it's definitely got a role to play. It's that quality assurance, because too many times historically there have been failed retrofits, cowboy installers. People have lost a lot of faith in the industry. So there's a lot of repair work to do there, and I think that's what Trustmark is kind of set up to do, to try and provide a bit more assurance and support for people who are often putting themselves in quite vulnerable positions, either financially by the outlay or having works done on their home. You know, that's their home, so they're kind of potentially being made quite vulnerable through that process. So they need the support.
Well, go on, we take one more, then we'll finish up with you, sir.
We have to address this retrofit is a social problem, or the problem facing only the social housing. People who are living in social housing, they have got 1,637 different problems they face every day. Retrofit might not be even at any level of them. So if we are able to address retrofit as a societal problem that needs some answers, that give some benefits to the society as a whole, then only we can do that. Because people who live in the social housing, they're just not there. You might not be able to consult with them.
You're right, and actually there's some fantastic groups around the country, and I'm thinking of one in particular called Civic Square, that are based in Birmingham, and they work with Dark Matter Labs, and they've got this whole philosophy around community and building at neighbourhood level, and actually engaging local people, so local tradespeople, and it starts with the education process of informing them the actual benefits that are derived from retrofitting those properties. So I agree with that comment. That is required to achieve retrofitting at scale.
I think if we can get all the social housing, for example, off the grid, by putting solar panels or heat pump as you suggested, that means it benefits the society as a whole, not just the social housing itself. And so if we are able to look at the problem from that angle, and let's say by doing that we are helping the society, not just the people who live in social housing, then at least we can say that let's just do it, regardless of what people in social housing come up with, they protest or they ask for, or not. None of that matters anymore.
Yeah, but there's always the question of funding. That will always be an issue. And you know, that's one of the things that needs to be tackled through the whole retrofit solution. And I think the gentleman behind you, John, mentioned about the national retrofit strategy. That is required. There needs to be there needs to be government down action, but there's also this roots bottom up approach as well if we're going to achieve it at scale.
Sorry, just to continue from that gentleman. Sorry for butting in.
No.
We need to see successful examples. Now you've got an exhibition. Do you have? Are you planning on bringing residents to show this? Are you planning on bringing students to show this?
Yes, very much so. So our first event next week is on Monday. It's open to the public, and the idea is for you to come in. There'll be experts on the ground, people from Arabs Engineering, Professor David Glee, who runs the Sustainable Institute at Leeds Beckett University. He will be here with his team. There'll be a couple of manufacturers as well, manufacturer of a product called Qbot, which is an insulation void product. So they are there to answer those questions. And in fact, ourselves as a building centre, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar, but the building centre sits below the Built Environment Trust, which is a charity registered organisation. We have funded a project with London School of Architecture, and we're trying to work with Hackney Council to open up what we call a healthy home hub. And again, it moves away from that terminology of retrofitting, because the average person on the street doesn't really understand what they mean by retrofitting a property. It's okay for the professionals. They do. So the idea is that anybody can walk into it. It'd be on the high street, and they can walk in and they can ask a question. You know, we've got black spots in the tall corner of our ceilings. You know, what could it possibly do? How do we deal with it? And the idea is we'd run these out regionally. We're also talking to an architectural practice in Manchester that are fully supportive of it. And not necessarily the answers will be provided then and there, but it will direct people to find the solutions to those problems, and also answer the questions about retrofitting. You know, how do we go about it? We've had, since this exhibition has opened, we've been inundated with people saying to us, I'm just confused, you know, I don't know what window systems to put in, you know, I've been told that air source heat pumps don't work. So the idea is to answer those questions, because there are so many unknowns, and it's demystifying. Someone's used the word, you know, you need to demystify it. It's true, we do need to demystify the whole process.
Should just say it. Yeah, so this, the two projects that I presented on earlier, they are on site now, so there's nothing immediately to show, but we worked on a number of schemes over the last few years, one in Sutton in South London, where we did the Energy Sprong model to 6 properties, and we've done a year of monitoring since then. Residents' bills have reduced by as much as 50%. Taking into account, obviously, the spikes in the unit cost recently, and overall monitoring for humidity, CO2, and temperature is all hitting targets. So we've got examples of stuff which really has worked, which is really positive, because you know there've been so many horror stories in the past. Just pick up quickly on the gentleman's comments there. So I think what you're saying, sir, is a lot of these issues, they are connected anyway. I mean, you know, health problems associated with poor housing has a direct impact on the NHS, just to take one example. Also, the whole sort of culture thing, how we live in our homes and how we live as part of a community. I think a lot of the issues are connected, and I think a lot of the change needs to come, as this exhibition from the Building Centre is going to show, about the role community can play, and the role that local resident groups are playing in getting together as a community to drive sort of community-led solutions, maybe away from the sort of centralised power grid, perhaps. So I think that's a really big theme, and I look forward to seeing a bit more at the exhibition.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of wrap up, do all take the opportunity to look at the exhibition. There's feedback boards there as well, and you know, we really do want feedback, because that directs us in terms of the talks and the events that we are going to be putting on. And if you just keep an eye on the website, we've got, I think, about 20 or so events already listed for the webinars and the actual talk events like tonight. So keep an eye on those. We'd love to see you at future events. And it's been added to constantly, so there's about 20 up there. I think the programme will grow to about 40 strong talks and events over the next 4 months, so please do engage. Thank you very much. And again, please feel free to join us for drinks afterwards, courtesy of our sponsor tonight, Greenhouse.